Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, a group of leading Iranian and Afghan women are calling to make gender apartheid an international crime. I'll be talking shortly to Dr. Evelina Ohab, a lawyer who's working on the campaign. Also, as southern Turkey rebuilds following that catastrophic earthquake in February, once again, women are being impacted the most, with many living in tent cities where hygiene conditions are poor and their safety is at risk. And we meet some of Egypt's most decorated athletes, the women's field hockey team that's scoring more than goals as they face gender discrimination, not to mention a lack of sponsorship. But first, with the situation continuing to deteriorate for women in both Afghanistan and Iran, there's growing frustration over what the international community can actually do to place pressure on the regimes of both countries. With their eye on the long term, a prominent group of Afghan and Iranian women are now backing a campaign calling for gender apartheid to be recognised as a crime under international law. This because current laws covering discrimination against women fail to capture the systemic nature of the policies imposed in Afghanistan and Iran to massively downgrade the status of women in society. Joining me now from Stuttgart is Dr. Evelina Ohab, a lawyer with the International Bar Association Human Rights Institute, who's working on the campaign. Dr. Ohab, thank you so much for your time. While there is a crime of apartheid in international law, it only applies to racial groups, not to gender. So what is it going to take to make gender apartheid an international crime?
Indeed, the current definition of apartheid is designed around the concept of race. And that was, of course, in response to the racial segregation in a number of countries around the world. There are several experts around the world who actually argue that we can broaden the scope of the current definition and broaden its interpretation to include also sex and to include gender apartheid within the existing provisions. So, of course, that's one way of engaging on the topic, ensuring that currently, as it stands, the international community considers gender apartheid to be included within the generic definition of apartheid. But unfortunately, if this does not work, we'll need to take the longer route and ensure that various provisions are amended to include the topic of gender apartheid, whether in the Rome Statute or other international treaties and resolutions.
Would it mean, Dr. Ohab, that we would see cases being tried at the International Criminal Court?
Some of the practices that we describe as gender apartheid could be prosecuted within the crime of crimes against humanity as gender persecution. But at the same time, there is a growing body of experts who argue that the topic in the crime of gender persecution is not enough to cover what is happening to women and girls in Iran and Afghanistan. The systematic targeting of women and girls in Iran and Afghanistan, the nature of this targeting, the separation of women and girls from the society requires a different approach. And there's a growing body of expertise to suggest that apartheid is the right word to describe it. And because of that, of course, with this campaign, we are trying to ensure that the crime that is being perpetrated against women and girls in Iran and Afghanistan has its own name.
This is clearly going to be a very long, drawn-out process. So where does this leave the women of Afghanistan and Iran in the meantime?
Of course, as we work on this campaign, as we try to support this campaign from different parts of the world, the situation of women in Iran and Afghanistan is not improving. And I think this is very important to emphasize it. We always hear about the situation of women and girls in Iran and Afghanistan whenever something bad happens, whenever the stories reach the headlines. But unfortunately, then the international attention moves very, very quickly. And this does not mean that the situation of women and girls in Iran and Afghanistan is improving. Quite the contrary. Various atrocities are being perpetrated in silence, behind closed doors. And unfortunately, as the international attention moves away from those stories, the situation just deteriorates, and the perpetrators get the message that they can get away with those atrocities because the international community moves on.
This is geared specifically towards women in those two countries, but could it also apply to other parts of the world where gender discrimination is clearly being enforced and where women confront even higher levels of violence?
Of course, at this stage, this campaign is led by Afghani and Iranian women. But ultimately, of course, once this crime is established as a crime, it could benefit also women from different parts of the world. It is not necessarily, and in the definition, it will not say that it's only in relation to Iran and Afghanistan. So, of course, it could be used to ensure that the perpetrators in different parts of the world are also prosecuted for this crime. And unfortunately, as we've seen with Afghanistan, as the Taliban was taking over, the situation was getting worse and worse. This kind of treatment of Afghani women and the international reaction to it, which was silence, more or less silence. Of course, there have been some calls to address the situation, but ultimately that was not enough. So this allowing the Taliban to continue treating women this way empowered other perpetrators around the world. And then we've seen, of course, the increase of attacks on women and girls in Iran. And we'll see similar situations around the world, because if we don't address such horrific atrocities as we see in those two countries, there will be others who will take the very same approach to the rights of women and girls.
Dr. Wahab, thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you very much, Annette.
Now to Turkey, which is dealing with the consequences of February's devastating earthquake that killed nearly 48,000 people. And as traditionally is the case, women in affected areas continue to bear the load for their families when it comes to domestic care. This as they struggle to meet their own basic needs, with many living in tent cities where hygiene conditions are poor and their safety is at risk. Catherine Kedder-Clifford has more.
These few makeshift tents represent a place of support and solidarity for many women here in Hatay. Since the earthquake struck on February 6th, they found themselves lacking necessities which they feel uncomfortable asking for in crowded aid centres.
There's no bathroom, no toilet, no water here. We have nothing. That's how it is. There are a lot of things I need. We don't have underwear. We don't have clothes.
While they come to terms with personal losses, the burden falls on these women to cook and keep up with domestic tasks for their families, all while looking after children and the elderly. While helping them to process their shock and grief, this doctor provides basics such as menstruation products and contraception. She says more women are having genital health issues because of poor hygiene conditions in the camps.
Since all aid is distributed in public spaces, in zones where everyone is around, women find it hard to ask for the products they need.
Many women also fear for their safety. The Turkish Workers' Party has set up a safe place for vulnerable women and LGBT+ people in this displacement camp.
In order to maximize their safety, many of our friends, volunteer friends, keep watch with us in the tent area with the banner you see behind me, keeping this place safe.
For the time being, activists and doctors say they haven't noticed a particular spike in domestic violence or abuse since the disaster, but women's rights groups warn it's only a matter of time in a country where violence against women is prevalent. In 2022, at least 327 women were victims of femicide, according to the news site BNet.
And finally, it's probably not a women's sport you would normally associate with Egypt, but one field hockey team in the Nile Delta is blazing a trail in a region which actually lays claim to the sport's ancient roots. And its players have become the most decorated in Egypt, despite a lack of sponsorship.
Early forms of the game were played here in Sharqiya by ancient Egyptians. More recently, it's been Egyptian women's turn to pick up a hockey stick. Sharqiya has the most decorated female hockey team in the country and has attracted international attention. 4 members have been offered contracts abroad, although none have taken the offer up.
Playing outside Egypt isn't possible because of my household duties. But I could play for another local club.
But even in Egypt's patriarchal society, mentalities are beginning to change.
No girl has managed to break the barrier and play abroad yet, but I hope I will be the first to do so. If I got a marriage proposal from someone who didn't accept that I continue playing or coaching hockey, I would discuss it with him, but if he insisted, I would refuse his proposal.
The barriers are also financial, though. The imported kit is expensive in a country where the local currency has been on a continuous downward spiral.
The goalkeeper's protective pads cost 65,000 Egyptian pounds, or more than $2,100 US. We have 2 to 3 goalkeepers, so we need at least 200,000 Egyptian pounds to buy their uniforms.
The challenge now for the team is to raise their profile, bring in sponsors, and nurture the next generation's ambition.
And that's all for this edition. We'd love to hear your comments and story ideas, so do connect with us via our Facebook, Instagram or Twitter accounts. So until our next show, bye for now.